Okay, everybody. I'm gonna get started. Again, as you come in, I have a couple more people come in. I ask please mute your microphone. I want to minimize any feedback on the line during this call. If you do have questions or comments, I would ask you please drop those into the chat box, and I'll make sure I get to those questions in the question and answer portion towards the end of the presentation. So again, my name is Travis Perlman. I'm a project coordinator with the Austin Housing Finance Corporation. Y'all are here obviously for the 1127 Tillery Street request for proposal that our organization put out. Joining on the line with us today are Alan Fish, procurement specialist. He's working, helping out with the procurement angle of this. Alan, would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yep, my name's Alan Fish, procurement specialist, Austin Housing Finance Corporation.
Thank you, Alan. Also joined on the line in the background is Jeff Patterson, helping his communications team, helping out with the technology on the back end. So thank you, Jeff, for assisting with that. Okay, so I'm going to move pretty quickly through this presentation. It's very high level. It's largely a rehashing of the request for contents of the RFP itself. So again, I'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes on the presentation itself, but I'll leave the bulk of the meeting, about 30 to 40 minutes or so, for any participants on the call today to ask any questions or make any comments that they might have. Again, thank you everyone for joining us this Monday evening. In terms of what we're going to go through, I'll give you a brief introduction to our organization, discuss preferred forms and flow of communication while this request for proposal solicitation is open. I'll go over, high level of the overview of the property itself, the development objectives of the RFP, the criteria under which proposals will be evaluated, the timeline for the solicitation, and any submission and contracting requirements required of any proposers. And then again, lastly, we'll round up with a question and answer session at the end. So some of you may be familiar with our organization, but some of you may not. We're the Austin Housing Finance Corporation. We're a housing finance corporation organized under the Texas Local Government Code. There are many other housing finance corporations throughout Texas and this country. Ours was created by the Austin City Council in 1979 to obviously develop income restricted affordable housing. We do a variety of different things to achieve that in the city. When we are in the office, we are located at 1000 East 11th Street and Suite 200. So while this request for proposal is open, we ask that all communications with city staff or housing finance AHFC staff regarding this solicitation be directed to the authorized contacts, being either Alan or myself, and that those communications preferably be provided in an email. It's important, we prefer that both questions are submitted in email, and then our responses, just so there's a transparent public record to ensure that this is an equitable and transparent process. In terms of any notifications, so we already had some good questions asked, both in email, and so we are anticipating releasing some clarifications to the RFP, just some further details, not necessarily any changes, but just further enumerating some requirements. Those clarifications will be released in batches, right? Again, we anticipate releasing the first batch, and it'll be emailed out to the original distribution list that we sent out the solicitation to, plus any new participants not included in that list, but who have registered for this call. In terms of disclaimer, we ask, as you're working on your proposal, that you respond directly to the RFP rather than anything that's said here tonight. To the degree that anything that's said here conflicts with the RFP itself, the RFP does control. So let's talk about the property a little bit. This is a little bit over a 5-acre property located in the Govalle neighborhood of East Austin. Has a couple of addresses for the purpose of this. We've called 1127 Tillery. This property was as a combination of a couple different parcels that was purchased by AHFC starting about 20 years ago. We purchased a number of these parcels, I believe 7 parcels over a period of about maybe 10 or 15 years, honestly. On the site, there is an existing pecan orchard. If you're familiar with the site, if you've visited the site, it takes up approximately 2.35 acres of the 5.15 acres property. We think that this, based upon aerial photographs, that this pecan orchard was likely planted sometime during the 1970s. Both in this pecan orchard and also in other portions of the property, generally fronting street frontage, where our historical home sites once were. There are a number of other trees on the site, both heritage and protected trees. Right now, we do have a. If you haven't visited the RFP website and seen, we do have a tree survey. That was done in 2019 that found 24 heritage and 31 protected trees on the site. The property has great access to central arterials, east-west and north-south. We have East 12th Street, East 7th Street, Rosewood and Oak Springs going east-west, and then obviously Airport Boulevard and Springdale going north-south. Has great access to public transit, to bus stops within walking distance, generally at Oak Springs and Airport Boulevard, essentially five different routes, including 2 high-frequency routes going east-west, north-south. There's also a variety of other neighborhood civic institutions within walking distance of the property. As well as you can see on the map, the public library, very nearby, Govalle Elementary, which is the elementary school, which this property is zoned for, also within walking distance, Boggy Creek Greenbelt. Also on this property, which I meant to add, and you can't see, very, very near the property as well, is the Austin Community College Eastview campus. The property is currently zoned SF3, so it is. It can be developed with residential housing as zoned, but depending obviously on the proposal, it could potentially require a rezoning, and in any rezoning, the onus on submitting that application and getting approval will be on the winning proposer. The AHFC, of course, will help out as needed, sign anything necessary to sign, but at the end of the day, it will need. It'll be the chosen proposer that's on point for ensuring any necessary approval of permits or applications. And then lastly, the property is not legally subdivided currently, so that property will need to be subdivided prior to development. So I'll talk about some of the development objectives of this solicitation. So we have 4 main ones, and no one is a certain higher priority than others, and so when these proposals are evaluated, they will be evaluated on balance of how they address these different development objectives. Firstly, again, we're a affordable housing finance corporation, where our interest is in developing income restricted and rent and sale restricted affordable housing. One of the main things, obviously, that we want to see is maximizing the number of affordable units. The City Council adopted strategic housing blueprint in 2017 that sets up 10-year housing goals for the city of Austin, very ambitious goals. And so ensuring that we maximize, making sure that our dollars, public dollars, go as far as they can is obviously key. So we want to maximize the number of affordable units, not only on this site, but basically any site that we put out for RFP, with a particular emphasis on providing deeply affordable units. So that would be units less than or equal to 50% of the MF median family income for the area. And then any winning proposer that would be selected would be expected that their development would be income and rent restricted for a long period of time. Long-term affordability, essentially at least 40 or more years for rental property from the day the certificate of occupancy is received, or 99 years in the case of ownership housing. We also want to maximize the proportion of affordable multi-bedroom units for families and dedicated continuum of care units for persons experiencing homelessness. And then we want to minimize City of Austin subsidy. Again, we want to ensure that our dollars go as far as we possibly can, given that we have a high need and limited public funds. In addition to that, any financial benefits that may be proposed, such as financial benefits that may be received by AHFC as part of a partnership agreement or something like that, of course, those would be looked favorably upon as well. And then lastly, this is a very unique site, being that it has an existing pecan orchard on it. Any people that may be familiar with the site or any of the previous community engagement, whether a number of years ago or just within the last several months around this site, may be aware that there's a strong community desire for people that live in this neighborhood that the trees be preserved on the site to the degree possible. AHFC has worked out an arrangement with the City of Austin Parks and Recreation Department for them to acquire approximately 1 to 2 acres of the pecan orchard to be dedicated as parkland. And that configuration, amount of parkland will largely be determined by the winning proposal. So in terms of how proposals evaluated, these are the criteria under which these proposals will be evaluated. There's a max score of 90 points, and all of these proposals will be evaluated by a panel of subject matter experts convened by the Austin Housing Finance Corporation, and evaluated on how well each proposal addresses the development objectives of the RFP, and how well each proposer demonstrates their ability to successfully complete the project. Again, based upon their response to these criteria. If you have already looked at the RFP, you may already know this, but I do want to, people that haven't had that opportunity yet, I do want to give a little bit more information. This is kind of a two-round solicitation. There'll be two different points where proposals are scored. So all proposals that are submitted prior to the due date and meet the minimum requirements will be evaluated by the RFP evaluation panel and scored on the evaluation criteria 1 through 5. And then the RFP panel will take up to the top 3 highest scoring proposers and invite those proposers to present to the RFP evaluation panel. In addition, Austin Housing Finance Corporation will take some of the documents provided, such as development budget, operating pro forma, and sources of funds, provide those to a third-party economic consultant that we've contracted with to perform financial feasibility analysis of the proposals. That information will be provided in a memo report for each proposal that's invited to present to the RFP panel. That will be provided to the panelists to consider when scoring evaluation criteria number 6. And then after that, potentially again up to the top 3 highest scoring proposers will present to the RFP evaluation panel. and then that panel will score that last evaluation criteria number 7. In terms of the timeline for this solicitation, so we released our this RFP on June 15th. We're here speaking today, obviously June 22nd. Proposals in response to this RFP are due by July 25th. And again, the initial panel scoring is going to be on August 5th for evaluation criteria 1 through 5. And we will, up to the top 3 highest scoring proposers may advance to presentations in the final scoring, which is expected to be held on August 26th at this point. And the Austin Housing Finance Corporation will then recommend the highest scoring proposer to the Board of Housing Finance Corporation Board of Directors for contract award. Ultimately, it will be up to the discretion of the Board of Directors to determine who ultimately receives, who ultimately gets selected for this contract award. And then we will, at that September 17th board meeting, we will ask the board to authorize the negotiation and execution of an agreement to develop the property. And then we will work closely, obviously, with the selected proposer in earnest to execute an agreement to develop the property prior to the end of this calendar year. In terms of submission requirements, we set a low bar in terms of the minimum required submission requirements. We wanted to make sure that we didn't exclude people. That's not to say that there won't be additional requirements, as particularly for the selected proposer. There will be a number of additional things that will be required in order for a contract to be executed. But in terms of just submitting the proposal itself and being considered, again, we wanted to set a low bar. So in terms of the minimum requirements for submission, all prime firms need to be legally formed corporations. And then there's a variety of supporting documents, the affidavit of submission, declaration of non-collusion, conflict of interest, anti-lobbying, and then the declaration of non-suspension or debarment. Those are included in the back of the request for proposal documents themselves. And then the last requirement is that we ask that all prime firms provide a certified financial audit with the submission of their proposal completed within the last 2 years to be considered. In terms of contracting requirements, so once the winning proposer is selected by the board, these are some of the minimum things that will be required of that winning proposer as a requirement of executing a contract to develop the property. Firstly, the prime firm has to be a registered vendor with the City of Austin. That's essentially how we disperse any funds that need to be dispersed. We ask, we'll require the winning proposer to add AHFC as an insured party on the prime firm's business insurance, potentially purchase additional coverage meeting AHFC's minimum standards. If anybody's familiar with the city's smart housing program, we'll require any developments for the selected proposer to participate in the city's smart housing fee waiver program, and also to comply with the city's smart housing preference policy, which there's a memo linked in the request for proposal itself where you can find the city's housing preference policy. Last 2 things, we may request for the winning proposal to furnish AHFC with a performance bond guaranteeing the completion of the project. And if the winning proposer proposes entering into a partnership or anticipates using bonds to finance development, we will require that AHFC is the issuer of those bonds or the general partner in that partnership. Okay, that's it. Again, very high level. I wanted to leave most of the time here for people to ask their questions. Again, please drop questions into the chat box, and I'll happy to get to those. I do see a question here. Says on priority development, I think this is about the development objectives. Priority number 2, does NHCD's definition of single room occupancy align with GDHC's? That is a great question. I know that has been a question on previous projects that we funded. Unfortunately, I will have to do a little bit of work to answer that question. I'm not really on the funding side per se for the financing program. That's where we interact with that the most. And so that is a question that I will have to follow up with. And I do want to make sure, if I hadn't already said this, we've gotten a number of questions so far. We will be issuing a batch of clarifications, kind of further enumerating our requirements, not necessarily corrections per se, but some good questions, like this question that was just asked will be included in that. It will send the answers to those questions out to the original distribution that we sent the solicitation to, and any individuals that registered for this meeting as well. Is there any other questions out there?
Travis, we have one about unlocking density. What types of tools are this in the box, and how might this resource be leveraged?
Okay. I can't see that question. So I think that's probably a reference to the affordability unlocked density bonus program that was passed last year. It's a great tool. It offers a pretty robust waivers and modifications to site development regulations in exchange for also pretty robust affordability requirements. We would expect that it's likely that probably most proposers would propose using that program, because it does provide a lot of benefits in terms of waivers and modifications to site development regulations. But ultimately, that'll be up to each proposal team to kind of determine how the land development code regulations influence development of the site. Okay.
This is another question that's been asked privately. Does AHFC have information about utility capacity, particularly for water, wastewater at the site?
Sure. We did, so for our stakeholder engagement, we did have a variety of consultants on board, including a civil engineer. They did a cursory look at utilities and infrastructure on the site. There are utilities. I think it's going to largely depend on the proposal in terms of whether there is appropriate capacity. I think there was questions around on the age of the infrastructure and utility infrastructure that's out there. And so there very well could be a need to increase utility capacity on the site. Okay, what else do we have? I have a question here. Can the proposer be a newly formed SPE? And you're going to have to forgive me. This is from Kirby. I do not know off the top of my head what an SPE is. So if you could help elaborate on that, I may be able to try and answer that.
While we try and figure that out, there's another private question, and it's a long one, so bear with me. Do you have an idea of what rezoning class is anticipated or expected by AHFC and or the neighborhood? Those restrictions will play into the design and numbers assumptions There is concern about zoning compatibility issues. Single-family neighboring lots will assume the need for compatibility setbacks with rezoning. Does NHCD have any thoughts on this or suggestions?
Sure, it's a great question. I don't want to speak, there's a lot of people, I always, when we talk about the neighborhood or the community, it's just a collection of people, and some people aren't included. It's a generalization, so take it with that. We did conduct stakeholder engagement for this site. Again, the stakeholder engagement was almost solely focused on the preservation of trees and particularly the pecan orchard on the site. The Govalle Neighborhood Association, which is the neighborhood association where this property is located, has basically framed the development of this site in terms of a compromise, where a portion of it is portion of the pecan orchard is preserved in exchange for what would be a more dense than typical development in this area on this site. I will say there are a number of other sites nearby that are have multifamily and commercial zoning, so that's not completely unheard of. Although, as noted, this is in a very residential area. In terms of HFCs, we don't have HFC does not have any. We really don't care about the zoning per se. Obviously, the zoning needs to be adequate to allow for the development of the proposed project and the proposal. So that's key. In terms of compatibility, there is compatibility, of course, but that can be potentially waived with the use of the affordability unlocked density bonus. Special purpose entity or vehicle. Thank you, Kirby. I don't think that should be an issue at all, but I think that's one of those things that I'm going to have to respond to in the clarification as well. But yeah, I think as long as it's a legal corporation, I don't foresee any issues with that. Okay, will HFC put a specific value on whatever portion of the site is used for development? Is HFC open to donating as well as leasing or selling, open to selling for $0? Okay, yeah, good question. Answer to all those questions is yes. We're extremely flexible. If you read through the RFP, we've laid out a variety of different tools, ground leases, you could purchase the site, you can purchase the site for $1, you could lease the site, for $0 or $1 a month. We understand that different types of developments have to be structured differently. For instance, a single room occupancy development serving, households that only earn below 30% MFI is much different than a family-friendly tax credit project with lots of multi-bedroom units. There's different financing, and so I think different types of proposals lend to different types of deal structuring. And ultimately, we're going to be looking for something that, again, offers lots of affordability, deep affordability, but balanced with the minimizing City of Austin subsidy. Okay, so because there is an audit as a prerequisite, that's a great point. So Kirby, I am going to have to follow up on that question. It's a good question. See, is HFC open using the proceeds from the sale of the park for housing development? We haven't discussed in terms of what we're going to use those funds for. We don't even know what that funding amount is. Ultimately, it's going to depend on where the actual agreement that we come to, the final agreement that we come to with PARD in terms of the amount of land that we sell to them. So yes, theoretically, it absolutely could be rolled into the project, but we haven't made that decision at this point. Okay, can you share your expectations for RFP response as it pertains to conceptual plans and detailed budget and how to navigate issues of assumptions? Okay, I'll try to answer that question. You may have to, may need to get a little bit more into specifics. In terms of the conceptual plans, you know, a detail in the RFP itself, it details kind of the minimum elements that have to be included. So things like buildings, the uses in the buildings, you know, trees, parking, any other amenities on the site. And so there's a minimum bar there in terms of what's to be shown, but obviously it's really up to the proposer in addition to that to kind of flesh out, you know, a conceptual plan that they think really highlights their proposal. Budget, in terms of the budget itself, there is in the RFP, we ask that you use the development budget documents that we've developed that's available on the RFP website. Again, that link to RFP website is in the actual RFP document multiple times. And so you can download those Excel documents, and we would expect that the development budget, pro formas, any sales data is included in those spreadsheets. Okay. I don't have any other questions in my feed. Jeff, did you have anything that maybe I'm missing?
No, sir. I think you got to the bottom of them.
Hey, Travis.
Go ahead, Alan.
This is Alan Fish. So, as far as the question and answer clarification going out, we're going to try to compile all these questions and get them out as soon as we can. We've obviously got 4th of July holiday coming up. So I guess in my mind, I'm thinking we're going to get the first series of questions out hopefully before the 4th. And then if there's a second or a third, at some point we're going to have to cut off the question answer session, which is usually about 7 days before the due date. So I just want to emphasize, and we'll talk about this in the clarification, that don't wait to ask your questions. I know people wait to get all their proposals put together to the last minute, but we're going to have a quiet period at some point so that we don't have to extend the deadline in order to answer questions that are still coming in. So that's kind of the scenario. We're going to hopefully get this first series of questions out, which is hopefully the lion's share, hopefully before the 4th. A lot of hopefullys there. And then any other questions that come in, hopefully we'll have all the questions in and all the answers out and still give you like a week to meet the deadline. So just throwing that out there for you. And then the other thing on the bar that we've set for the RFP, we are requiring the certified audit, which is, you know, a fairly high bar if you're a business that does not have a certified audit. And also you have to be a going business and you have to have experience. So those are the thresholds that we're requiring as to submit this RFP.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, I have a couple more questions, it looks like here that popped up in the chat box. This is looks like an addition to Debbie's question regarding the concept plan. For example, some concept area may require specific zoning or specific classification or type of waiver. If these are not considered at the time of RFP submission, is it expected that the applicant demonstrate or can they state the assumption? That's a good question. So in terms of, let's say, development permits, zoning applications and approvals, stuff like that, any applications or required permits it would be the expectation of the Housing Finance Corporation that the selected proposer be the lead and be responsible for ensuring the submission and approval of any of those applications. So in terms of zoning per se, again, we would expect that the winning proposer would submit that application for rezoning if needed. And we would of course work with that proposer as needed to help ensure the approval of that zoning case. In terms of the proposal itself, yes, it is safe to use assumptions. That's pretty standard in any type of proposal for developments, but especially affordable housing development. You know, these things are kind of a work in progress until everything's finally ironed out. And so we would expect that these would be assumptions, but I think, you know, we have questions that speak to, they get to the success of proposers to complete projects similar in this nature previously. And so examples of projects with rezoning and stuff like that, of course, are going to be looked favorably upon. Let's see, what kind of architectural detail will be required? Plans, renderings. So the only thing that will require with the submission of the proposal is basically two-dimensional conceptual drawing, basically a rough site plan site. And again, in the RFP itself, it kind of lists the minimum elements that are expected to be included in that conceptual plan. That's not to say that you can't submit additional diagrams as well. That's I think that would be only add value to a proposal. Can you clarify the prime firm and the role between a nonprofit audit and developer with experience who may not have the audit? Yeah. Well, part of the reason that we want to see a certified audit, obviously, is to ensure that the prime firm is in good financial standing. And so that's at this point, that's all that we're asking. I think it's going to depend on how the development entity is organized. For instance, if it's just a nonprofit and there's a separate developer that's essentially a sub-consultant, we would be looking at the finances of the nonprofit prime firm. But if, for instance, if it was a partnership between, say, the nonprofit and a development company, we may want to look at the finances of both companies. Any other additional questions that y'all might have? Again, I also want to thank everybody again for participating, joining us this Monday evening, and for your interest in this project. And as I mentioned in the beginning, Alan and I would ask that any additional comments or questions after this meeting be submitted to Alan and myself an email, and of course we're happy to respond to those when we can, and potentially put those out in clarifications. Okay. Couple more questions. Because it takes a while to get it audited, is it possible to submit separately from the RFP? Submit an audit separately from the RFP? I don't know. I think that's something that we're going to have to discuss internally because we have noted it as a minimum requirement in this RFP.
Yeah, I think the way the RFP is written, the answer is no right now.
Yes. I agree. I agree. Okay. I'll wait around for a couple more minutes if anybody has any other questions. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Okay, I don't see any more questions. I hear people exiting off of the call. Thank you again, everybody, for attending. And look for our clarifications that we send out shortly. Hope you all have a good evening. Thank you, everybody.